Greetings from the Holy Apple Super Wednesdays here in Tapuach, the 8th day of Shvat 5778. Countdown, 7 days to go to the 15th of Shvat, to be Shvat. Quick summary of last class. This is the finale. Yay, the finale. And we're going to go for the Grand Slam over here. This is part 5. It's really part 3, but how the way that they break it up here. So we're on part 5. So quick summary of last week's parts 3 and 4. We saw how throughout the portions of the week from Genesis, going down all the way past, going through the entire book of Genesis, 12 portions that are in the book of Genesis. We see there a chain, a link after link, how after the sin of Adam and Eve, there are generations and generations that are brought back and trying what they call in Hollywood take 2, and then take 3, and then take 4. We spoke about how the person closest to correcting the sin of Adam and Eve was Jacob, who at the age of 84, he marries, and he never saw in his life, during those 84 years, he never saw any spilling of his seed. And we were very, very close to the end zone, to the finish line. However, we see that Dinah is raped. Dinah is raped in the city of Shechem, and the Torah specifically uses the expression the daughter of Jacob. Why not just Dinah, plain Dinah? The reason being is that the Torah is trying to teach us a lesson here to understand that Jacob was very, very close to rectifying and fixing the sin of Adam and Eve. However, close, but no cigar. So therefore, when his daughter was raped and defiled sexually, this is just to show us that there was something still missing in this realm of holiness of Jacob. We see this continues in the next portion, where we talk about Joseph, and he was successful on one hand in standing against the temptation of the sin of having relations with the wife of Potiphar. On the other hand, the Talmud tells us that Joseph emitted semen at the same time, and therefore Joseph was really supposed to have 12 tribes. We know that he only had 2, Menashe and Ephraim, and the reason being that the sages tell us that for each drop of semen that was emitted, he lost one of the future tribes. So there were 10 parts of the seed, and therefore he lost 10 children. From there, we go on to the book of Shmot, and we know that this is the period of time every year where we have a golden opportunity to fix and correct the sins of Adam and Eve with promiscuity, sexual promiscuity, spilling of seed, modesty, all connected, modest issues connected to this issue. We spoke about last week a great question that the Darkei Noam asked. How come we don't start these weeks of rectifying the sins of Adam and Eve? Why don't we start when Jacob is born, or Jacob is older and he never emitted semen? Why do we wait till the portion of the week of Shmot? We could also start from Joseph. Joseph was successful in standing against the temptation of the wife of Potiphar. So the Darkei Noam tells us an unbelievable TKO. He really gives us that final TKO. He tells us that the Torah wanted, the sages wanted specifically to start when the nation of Israel begins. Because when push comes to shove, Jacob, he's a righteous person, but he's an individual righteous person. Joseph, he's of course a righteous person. That's why he's called Joseph the righteous, Yosef HaTzadik. However, he's still an individual. And what we're trying to correct, and what we're trying to bring about, the change, the revolution that we're trying to bring about during these 6 weeks, from the portion Shmot until 6 weeks later to the portion of the week that we read also in the book of Exodus, Mishpatim, what we're trying to bring around, he says, bring about, is the total redemption of the Jewish people. This is not only a time for individuals, everybody on their own level, to try to rev up their engines and try to correct and fix times that we've fallen in the past or present, as far as the subject is concerned. So it's true, everyone of course has to, look in the mirror and take care of themselves. However, much more important, that there is a national effort right now, all us Jews together, united, trying to rectify this sin. And once we rectify this sin, this is something that could bring the final redemption. Which means the reason why the Jews were in exile was because of promiscuity in the sexual realm. Therefore, during these 6 weeks, the Jewish nation as a whole, we are trying to work together, not only as individuals, but also work together and try to fix what needs to be fixed in this facet of life. So that's why specifically our sages chose Shmot, because now we have a nation of Israel. Whereas before in Genesis, we're only dealing with individuals. So we said, let's take a look at Shmot. What's going on? Really amazing. If we look at the beginning of Shmot, we will see 3 incidents, and we'll be able to understand the relevance of these issues to the times that we are in now. Times of correcting our sexual behavior. So, number 1, there's an amazing Or HaChaim HaKadosh. Or HaChaim HaKadosh writes in the first chapter of Shmot, he asked an unbelievable question. Why did the Egyptians decree to kill all firstborn males? Why did they decree to kill all firstborn females? Now, I know maybe you're thinking that they were so gentlemanly, so they wanted to, usually it's ladies first, but here they said we're going to save the women, but I don't think that was the case. So what in the world, why didn't they just decide to kill all the firstborn females? Why is there a preference on their part to kill the males? That's his question, and he gives an unbelievable answer. His answer, the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, the commentator, says the following: that the plan, the spiritual plan of the Egyptians were spiritual people. As we know, we're not going to go into this is a subject unto itself, but in the old days, when people worshipped idols, they were not a bunch of idiots and a bunch of nerds. No, they were very intelligent people, and there was a lot behind what's going on there. They were people that connected spiritually. They were people that connected wrongly, but they connected on a spiritual level which we cannot even understand. Most people today in our times cannot even understand. So they understood spiritually, in order to overcome the Jewish people, they must assimilate the Jews. And it was according to their understanding, if they got rid of all the males, then that would just leave the women, and they would be able to assimilate and marry into and join with the Jewish women. So we see right off the bat, the Egyptians' plan was to keep the Jewish women and assimilate them, and also to sexually defile them, which is exactly this period of the year what we're trying to rectify and change. So that's number one, unbelievable, Or HaChaim HaKadosh. Second incident we see, shortly after this, we see when the Jews are slaves, there's an incident with Shlomit bat Divri. Shlomit bat Divri, Shlomit, the daughter of Divri, that's an unusual name. Our sages ask in Shmot Rabbah, the first chapter, the 33rd paragraph, they ask a question, what kind of name is this, the daughter of Divri? So it says that she would speak constantly to all males. How you doing? What's up? What's your name? Where are you from? She would have conversations with random males that she would run into. Now there's a question, what happened to her exactly? There are two opinions amongst the sages. First, let's review what happened. As we explained last week, there was a taskmaster or slave master who was responsible for 10 Jewish policemen. And each Jewish police officer was responsible for 10 slaves. So you had basically one slave master who's under his jurisdiction are like 110 people. So the slave master would come and wake up the 10 police officers, and the 10 police officers would wake up each of their 10 slaves. One night, a certain Egyptian slave master comes into the house of Datan, the infamous Datan, and he wakes him up, and he leaves his house. In the meantime, the slave master is hiding outside, and he sneaks back inside. It's totally dark in the house, in the bedroom, and he has relations with Shlomit bat Divri. He has relations. So according to this opinion, she knew nothing about this. However, the Torah goes and points out that this was an exception to the rule case, because the Jews did not sexually assimilate and intermarry in Egypt. This was one of their traits that saved them. However, an astonishing other take on what happened is to be found in Vayikra Rabbah 32:4. It says the following: the beginning is the same. The slave, the taskmaster, comes into the house of Datan, and he tells him it's time to get up, to wake up the other policemen. And he leaves the house. Datan leaves the house, and the Egyptian hangs out. In the meantime, Shlomit Badivri cranks up a conversation with the Egyptian. When the Egyptian sees that she's willing to tango with him, willing to converse, willing to, to deal with him and to have a conversation, he says to himself, she's mine. And then he has relations with her. So she knew, according to this opinion, she knew what was happening, or there was other opinion that he left after the conversation. He left, but later on he came back, and it was dark, and she didn't know who it was. So there's difference of opinion. Was she aware or not aware?
Was she the wife of Datan or the daughter of Datan? What's her relationship?
She was the wife. She was the wife of Datan. So it's an amazing thing here. We see a second case, the first being the Egyptians wanting to kill only the males and leaving the females in order to defile and assimilate them. Number two, we see this Egyptian fellow having relations with Shlomit bat Ivri. Scenario number three, this is really wild. Many commentators have pulled out their hair and their beards, trying to come to a conclusion about the following scenario in the Torah. We know that Moses sees an Egyptian beating up a Jew. Moses goes out and kills the Egyptian. Now the question is, was Moses correct in his actions? He goes out. We know that if you hit somebody, the punishment for smacking somebody is not death. So what's going on over here? Why did Moses blow away the Egyptian? It seems kind of harsh treatment for someone that's hitting. Imagine, every time in school, high school or elementary school, every time a teacher saw two kids going at it, he just another one bites the dust, I mean, it's a little bit harsh. So there are many opinions. We've done a few classes on the subject. There even is the opinion that Moses was incorrect in his actions. But that's for a different time, or you could look it up in previous classes, previous years. So, Rav Sorotskin, in his classic commentary on the Torah, Oznaim LaTorah, on Exodus chapter 2, verse 12, he asked that question. What in the world is going on with Moses? Why is his reaction so extreme? I mean, okay, the guy's hitting, so separate them. Maybe punch him in the stomach, hit him in the leg, and he'll be in. Okay, you go ahead and kill a person. Listen to his words. Hold on, we have no insurance here because we're going for a ride. Moses acted extreme and not by chance. He, on purpose, he was knowledgeably, that's his response. Why? Because Moses was afraid that this Egyptian, which Egyptian is this? This is the Egyptian that raped Shlomit bat Ivri. This is the Egyptian that raped her. So first of all, Moses knew that. Number two, Moses is worried that this Egyptian is going to go to his fellow Egyptian friends, family members, and boast about how he raped a Jewish woman. And this will be a catalyst for other Egyptians to follow suit and defile Jewish women. And Moses knew that in order for the Jewish people to leave Egypt, one of their merits was going to be that they kept themselves pure on a sexual level. They did not mingle, they did not have relations, they did not intermarry with the Egyptians, men or women. So Moses knew that this was the key to the redemption. So therefore, in order for it to be heard on Egyptian news, all over Egypt, on the radio, on the net, all over, so the Egyptians should hear that a man, an Egyptian that had relations with a Jewish woman was slain. That was the purpose of Moses. He wanted that to be publicized all over Egypt. Don't mess with Jewish women. So therefore, it is true that a person that smacks somebody up or hits somebody, he is not, you don't have to put him to death. He's not obligated to be put to death. But Moses was making an exception to the rule. Many times in the Torah, there's something called Hora'at Sha'ah. When certain leaders, when certain righteous people saw that there was a time where something the law had to be a little bit twisted in order to save the Jewish people, that's what they did. And this was an exception to the rule. And this was to save the Jewish people from the exile and from slavery, and eventually this is what saved the Jewish people. This modest sexual behavior amongst the Jews. We spoke about the trait that the Jewish men and Jewish females did not have any relations, sexual relations with the Egyptians. They did not intermarry with the Egyptians. There are 2 or 3 other characteristic traits that redeemed the Jewish people. In their merit, the Jewish people were redeemed. This is listed on Vayikra Rabbah 32:5. Rav Huna, in the name of Bar Kapra, says, due to four items, 4 characteristic traits, 4 merits, the Jewish people were redeemed out of Egypt. Number 1, they did not change their names. 2, they did not change their language. They spoke the Hebrew tongue, the holy tongue. Number 3, they did not turn in fellow Jews to the authorities. They did not think on fellow Jews. And number 4 is that they were holy on the subject of sexual relations. They did not intermingle with the Egyptians. So it says, the sages go on, that they did not change their names. Reuven did not change his name to Rupa or Lulian, and Yosef didn't change his name to Leistim, and Benjamin did not change his name to Alexander. They kept their Jewish names. We spoke about a month and a half ago on Hanukkah, we spoke about the fact that the Jewish people, in recognition of the kindness that Alexander the Great did for the Jewish people, because he was about to destroy the temple and destroy the Jewish people, but in the end, he instead of destroying the Jewish people, he destroyed the Samaritans, who are not too far away from us here in the from the city of Shechem. So, in order to show gratitude to Alexander the Great, Jews started naming their children Alexander, which is a very nice thing to do. However, many of the commentators say, even though this was like a nice gesture, in the long run, we see that this led to assimilation, and we know that the number one war that was taking place during the Hanukkah time was not against the Greeks, was against the Hellenist Jews. So this, by changing one's name, let's put the cards on the table. This is very interesting. This piece by our sages is amazing. Why? Because right now, we're going to see the second side of the coin. Up until now, pretty much, we've discussed one side of our coin. That during these weeks, the six-period week, called the Shovavim, okay, we are trying to correct and rectify and bring about the redemption of the Jewish people through correcting and rectifying any and all sins that we transgressed sexually, whether by ourselves, with other people, homosexual, whatever way. If it's something that's not connected to a husband and a wife, then we have our work cut out for us. So that's one side of the coin. That's one side of the coin. God intended, God gave us a gift of life. Life in our seed, in the semen. And when a man marries a woman, in Torah eyes, in the eyes of the Torah, they become one. So once again, the idea of the Torah is to keep a person's future generations, the seed of a man and a woman, to keep it in a unified, in a unit of one. Not to scatter. When one goes out and has relations with many women, he is taking his power to procreate, and he's scattering it around. If a person by himself does certain actions, then they are once again scattering something that God intended to be united and unified in one. When a person has, same thing, homosexual relations, same thing. It's being, something that's supposed to be united is becoming scattered. So that's one side. But there's a second side to our coin as far as scattering semen or seed or life. And that side is very important. And that side, that is another reason. Why do we start during the book of Shmot, these 6 weeks? We ask, why don't we start in Genesis with Jacob, with Joseph? No, we must start now, because the second side of our coin, which is as important as the first side, promiscuity, sexual promiscuity, we have a second side, and that is mingling and getting together and having relations, not sexual relations, but starting to build bridges and relations with the non-Jewish world. So listen closely. The Torah teaches us, our sages teach us, that there were 4 things that saved the Jewish people. 4 things. Amazing. Number 1, they did not change their names. What does that mean? When a person changes their name, it becomes that much easier to assimilate with the nations who have similar names. Right? When I was born, I was given 2 names. Won't tell you my first name was. I was given 2 names. One name of the Gentiles and a Jewish name. Like many, many religious people today. When I think of it today, it cringes me just to think about it. It's amazing what saved our ancestors from slavery in Egypt. Not changing your name. When you have a different name, when your name is hard to pronounce to the Gentile world, the chances of assimilating and joining forces with the nations of the world become much, much, much lower. If they can't pronounce your name, then most chances are they're not going to build a relation with you. Number two, they did not change their tongue. They continued speaking the holy tongue. Once again, if you walk the walk and you talk the talk, you are that closer to building bridges with the Gentile world. So if you don't speak their language, then you're tremendously isolated with your own Jewish people. So not changing one's names and not changing the language, it's exactly the same point. The same flag is being flown here. Keep separate from the nations. Do not mingle, do not build bridges, do not have relations. Number three, they did not change their dress. They did not dress like the Egyptians dressed. Same thing. If you dress like the nations of the world, it's that much easier for a person to assimilate into the culture and into the embracement of the nations of the world. So when you don't dress, when you dress differently, you look different, everyone wants to be the same. You know, people today, they all go with these same, purses, the Gucci bags, and they're all wearing those Nike sneakers, and everybody has the same jeans on and the same brand, and everybody wants to, not stick out, not be different. They all want to join together. So this also is the same ingredient to keep the Jews separate. And last but not least, there was no sexual mingling and no intermarriage between the Jewish people and the Egyptians, which of course is very simple, because if you do the math, number one, they didn't change their names. Number two, they didn't change their dress. Number three, they did not change their language. So that equals 4. Because if you keep the big 3, the end result, of course, is a separation and no assimilation. So that's the second part of our coin. So one side of this coin during this time of the Shovavim is what most people understand and have learned, is the sexual side, the promiscuity side, to the transgression of this issue, immodest behavior. But now we've added, there's a totally new perimeter here, that the second side of the coin is to keep our distance from the nations of the world, to keep separate. And that's why, if you think about it, God gave us the land of Israel. Why did He give us the land of Israel? Why don't we just be, why don't we just be all over the world? No. The plan of God was and is that the Jewish people should be a separate nation in a special separate land. Once we are separate amongst ourselves, and once we're in a separate country, then and only then could we be a light into the nations. And then we'll have a tremendous influence of bringing up the nations of the world through our acts, through our deeds. So that's the importance of the land of Israel, is not assimilating into the nations of the world. Mike, are we okay here on time-wise?